April 30th, 1942, 14:20 hours. Royal Air Force, Duxford, Cambridgeshire, England. Ronald Harker climbed into the cockpit of Mustang to serial number AG470, settled into the seat, and began his pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of a test pilot who'd logged over 3,000 hours in dozens of aircraft types. The 33-year-old Rolls-Royce test pilot hadn't planned on flying today. He'd driven up from the company's facility at Hucknall with his wife in a hired car, intending this to be more of a social visit with Wing Commander Ian Campbell Ord, the commanding officer of the Air Fighting Development Unit. But Campbell Ord had insisted. "You need to fly this American machine, Ronnie. It's quite something below 15,000 feet. Absolute rocket. But above that altitude, it's rubbish. Thought you might have ideas about the engine situation." Harker taxied the North American-built fighter to the runway, advanced the throttle, and felt the Allison V-1710 engine push him back into his seat as the Mustang accelerated. The takeoff was smooth, responsive. He climbed to 5,000 feet and began putting the aircraft through basic maneuvers, turns, rolls, climbs, dives. The Mustang was magnificent, light on the controls, incredibly fast in level flight, with range that exceeded anything the RAF currently operated. He checked his airspeed. 370 miles per hour at 10,000 feet, faster than a Spitfire Mark V at the same altitude. And the Mustang was carrying more fuel, had better visibility from the bubble-style canopy, felt more stable as a gun platform. Then he climbed to 18,000 feet. The performance degraded noticeably. At 20,000 feet, where the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fu-19Os operated most effectively, the Mustang became sluggish. The Allison engine, equipped with only a single-stage supercharger, simply couldn't deliver sufficient power at altitude. Harker knew engines. He'd been flying Rolls-Royce products for years, testing Merlins in Spitfires and Hurricanes and Lancasters. The Merlin-61, the company's latest variant with its two-stage, two-speed supercharger, was transforming the Spitfire Mark IX into a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching anything Germany fielded. And as Harker flew this American fighter with its beautiful airframe and disappointing power plant, a thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Put a Merlin-61 in this aircraft, and you'd have the best fighter in the world. He landed after 30 minutes aloft, thanked Campbell Ord for the opportunity, drove back to Hucknall with his wife, and couldn't stop thinking about what he'd experienced. The next day, May 1st, 1942, he sat down and wrote a memo to his superiors at Rolls-Royce. The memorandum would change the course of the air war over Europe. He wrote that the Mustang closely resembled the Messerschmitt Bf-109, probably because it was designed by one of the Messerschmitt designers now working for North American Aviation. This detail was wrong. Designer Edgar Schmude had never worked for Messerschmitt, but the rest of Harker's assessment was prophetic. The aircraft could prove itself a formidable low and medium altitude fighter. The point which strikes me is that with a powerful and good engine, like the Merlin-61, its performance could be outstanding, as it is 35 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire V at roughly the same power. Rolls-Royce management read Harker's memo with interest. The company was already producing Merlins for multiple aircraft types: Spitfires, Hurricanes, Lancasters, Mosquitoes. Every available engine was allocated. But the idea of creating a long-range, high-altitude fighter by marrying British engine technology with an American airframe that already excelled at low altitude was too promising to ignore. In June 1942, 5 Mustang Mark I airframes were diverted to Rolls-Royce's facility at Hucknall for conversion. The program designation was Mustang X. The engineering challenges were significant, but not insurmountable. The Merlin-61 was larger and heavier than the Allison V-1710. It required more cooling capacity due to its two-stage supercharger. The nose profile would need redesigning to accommodate the different engine mounting points. But Rolls-Royce's chief aerodynamic engineer, Witold Challier, ran calculations and estimated that a Merlin-powered Mustang could reach 441 miles per hour at 25,600 feet. That would make it faster than any fighter currently operational, German or Allied, at combat altitudes. Work proceeded through summer 1942 with urgency born from desperation. The air war over Europe was going badly for the Allies. American B-17 and B-24 bombers, conducting daylight strategic bombing raids against German industrial targets, were suffering catastrophic losses. The theory behind daylight bombing held that heavily armed bombers flying in tight defensive formations could fight their way to targets and back without fighter escort. Reality proved otherwise. German interceptors, especially the Focke-Wulf FW-190 with its 420mm cannons and 2 machine guns, tore through bomber formations with devastating effectiveness. On August 17, 1942, the same month Rolls-Royce began converting Mustangs, the U.S. 8th Air Force launched its first heavy bomber raid against occupied Europe, hitting the rail yards at Rouen-Sotteville in France. 12 B-17s participated. All returned safely, largely because the target was close enough to England that RAF Spitfires could provide escort for most of the mission. But Spitfires had limited range. They could escort bombers perhaps 175 miles from their bases before fuel limitations forced them to turn back. German industrial targets, the factories and refineries and transportation networks that strategic bombing doctrine demanded be destroyed, lay 400 to 600 miles from English airfields. Beyond Spitfire range, beyond any Allied fighter's range. The first Mustang X, serial number AL975, flew on October 13, 1942. Captain R.T. Shepard, Rolls-Royce's chief test pilot, took it up from Hucknall and immediately realized they'd created something extraordinary. The aircraft reached 413 miles per hour with full supercharger engaged. More importantly, it maintained that performance above 20,000 feet, the altitude where the Allison-powered version became sluggish. By November, testing revealed a maximum speed of 433 miles per hour at 22,000 feet and an absolute ceiling of 40,600 feet. The Merlin didn't just improve the Mustang's high-altitude performance. It transformed the aircraft into a weapon capable of fighting and winning at any altitude. Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Hitchcock, the American Assistant Military Air Attaché in London, saw the test results and understood their implications immediately. Hitchcock was a fascinating character, a champion polo player before the war, wealthy, well-connected, and absolutely committed to getting the best possible equipment into American pilots' hands. He'd flown the Mustang, knew about Rolls-Royce's conversion program, and began lobbying through official channels for the United States Army Air Forces to adopt the Merlin Mustang as quickly as possible. His advocacy faced resistance. The USAAF had already committed to other long-range fighters. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin-engine design, showed promise. The P-47 Thunderbolt, built like a tank and capable of absorbing tremendous punishment, was entering service. Some officers questioned whether a fighter designed by North American Aviation, a company with no previous fighter experience, and powered by a British engine could be better than American-designed alternatives. The institutional resistance frustrated Hitchcock, who wrote in one report that the Mustang had no parent in the Army Air Corps to appreciate and push its good points, sired by the English out of an American mother. But the numbers were undeniable. In August 1942, before the first Merlin Mustang ever flew, the USAAF placed an order for 400 P-51Bs, gambling that the performance predictions would prove accurate. This was extraordinary. The military was committing to large-scale production of an aircraft variant that existed only on paper and in Rolls-Royce's experimental conversions. The decision reflected the desperation of the strategic bombing campaign situation. Bombers were dying. Crews were dying. Something had to change. North American Aviation began converting 2 P-51A airframes, briefly designated XP-78, with Packard 5 1650-3 engines. Packard had negotiated a license to manufacture Rolls-Royce Merlins in America, and their version of the Merlin 61 was already entering production. The first XP-51B flew on November 30, 1942. Performance exceeded even optimistic projections. At 29,800 feet, It reached 440 miles per hour in level flight. That was 100 miles per hour faster than the Allison-powered P-51A at the same altitude. More critically, the aircraft's range, already impressive with the Allison engine, remained exceptional. With internal fuel and drop tanks, the P-51B could escort bombers 850 miles from base. That put Berlin within range. Production ramped up with remarkable speed. North American's Inglewood, California plant expanded massively. A new facility in Dallas, Texas began building P-51Cs, essentially identical to the B model but designated differently due to the production location. By early 1943, Mustangs were rolling off assembly lines at increasing rates. The RAF ordered 1,000 aircraft designated Mustang Mark III. The USAAF ordered thousands more. Everyone wanted the Merlin Mustang. The first P-51Bs reached operational squadrons in Europe in late 1943. The 354th Fighter Group, flying from Boxted in England, became operational in December. Their mission was straightforward and terrifying. Escort B-17 and B-24 bombers deep into German-occupied Europe, engage and defeat Luftwaffe interceptors, bring the bombers home. The bomber crews, who'd been flying unescorted missions and dying in horrifying numbers, greeted the Mustang pilots with desperate hope. Maybe, finally, they'd have protection all the way to the target and back. January 11th, 1944. The 354th Fighter Group escorted bombers to targets in Germany for the first time. The Mustangs performed exactly as promised. Fast enough to catch Luftwaffe interceptors, maneuverable enough to dogfight successfully, enough range to stay with the bombers for the entire mission. German pilots, accustomed to attacking unescorted bomber formations at will, suddenly faced American fighters at altitudes and ranges they'd considered safe. The psychological impact was devastating. March 4, 1944. American bombers, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, struck Berlin for the first time in a daylight raid. The symbolism was crushing for German morale. Berlin, the capital, the heart of the Reich, being bombed in daylight by enemy aircraft that flew all the way from England and back. Luftwaffe fighters rose to intercept, but couldn't prevent the bombing or inflict prohibitive casualties on the escorts. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, would later testify at Nuremberg that when he saw Allied fighters escorting bombers over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. The fighters he saw were Mustangs. The aircraft's effectiveness came from multiple factors working in combination. The laminar flow wing design, developed by North American engineer Raymond Rice, reduced drag significantly. The Packard Merlin engine, producing 1,490 horsepower at 3,000 RPM with the ability to push to 1,720 horsepower using war emergency power for brief periods, delivered outstanding performance at all altitudes. The two-stage supercharger maintained power output above 30,000 feet where earlier fighters struggled. But perhaps most importantly, the fuel efficiency was exceptional. The Mustang got 3.3 miles per gallon. The P-47 Thunderbolt got less than 1.8 miles per gallon. That difference meant Mustangs could fly twice as far on the same fuel load. Pilot testimonials emphasized the aircraft's superiority. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, a Mustang ace, wrote that the aircraft went like hell because the Merlin had great gobs of power and was equally at home, high or low, thanks to its two-stage, two-speed supercharger. Captain Don Gentile, who scored 21.83 aerial victories flying Mustangs, called it the perfect fighting machine. Lieutenant Urban Drew, who shot down two Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters while flying a P-51D, demonstrated that even Germany's revolutionary jets weren't safe from a well-flown Mustang. The strategic impact was decisive. Before the Merlin Mustang entered service, American bomber losses on deep penetration raids averaged 10 to 15% per mission. Those rates were unsustainable. Bomber crews faced a statistical certainty of being shot down if they completed a full tour of 25 missions. After P-51S began escorting bombers to targets throughout Germany, loss rates dropped to 2 to 3%, still terrible, but survivable. Bomber crews who'd flown earlier missions without fighter escort universally credited the Mustang with saving their lives. German pilots developed deep respect for the aircraft. Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland, who flew against Mustangs extensively, called it the best all-around fighter of the war. German after-action reports noted that the P-51 was faster than the Bf-109G at all altitudes and could outturn it at higher speeds. The FW-190 could match the Mustang in level speed below 20,000 feet, but was slower above that altitude. Neither German fighter could escape a Mustang in a dive. The only German aircraft that outperformed the P-51 was the Me-262 jet, and Mustang pilots developed tactics to attack Me-262S during takeoff and landing when the jets were most vulnerable. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe had been largely defeated over Western Europe. This wasn't primarily due to bombing aircraft factories or fuel refineries, though both contributed. The Luftwaffe was destroyed through attrition in air-to-air combat with Allied fighters, especially Mustangs, that killed German pilots faster than replacement pilots could be trained. Experienced German aces, men who'd survived years of combat on the Eastern and Western fronts, died in dogfights with American pilots flying Merlin-powered Mustangs. The loss of these veterans created a death spiral. Inexperienced replacement pilots died even faster, which created more need for replacements, which meant even less training time for those replacements. The Mustang's success also validated Harker's original insight. The best military solutions sometimes come from combining technologies from different sources rather than developing everything domestically. American airframe design plus British engine technology created a weapon superior to what either nation could have produced independently. This lesson, though difficult for some military and political leaders to accept, proved crucial to Allied victory. Total Mustang production exceeded 15,000 aircraft. They served in every theater of World War II. In the Pacific, P-51s flying from Iwo Jima escorted B-29 superfortresses on raids against the Japanese home islands, a mission profile identical to the European theater escort role. Mustangs shot down more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter in the European theater, a total exceeding 5,000 confirmed victories. The aircraft remained in service long after the war, flying combat missions in Korea and serving with numerous air forces worldwide into the 1980s. Ronald Harker, the test pilot whose 30-minute flight and subsequent memo started everything, lived to see the aircraft he'd championed become legendary. He died in 1999 at age 90, having witnessed the Mustang evolve from an interesting but flawed fighter into the aircraft many historians credit with winning the air war over Europe. His contribution, a simple suggestion that marrying a good airframe with a better engine might produce something extraordinary, demonstrated that sometimes the most important innovations come not from revolutionary new technology, but from recognizing how to combine existing technologies more effectively. Tommy Hitchcock, who pushed so hard for American adoption of the Merlin Mustang, died in April 1944 when the P-51 he was testing crashed. He was 44 years old. He never saw D-Day, never saw Mustangs escort bombers to Berlin routinely, never witnessed the complete air superiority his championed aircraft helped achieve. But by March 1944, when Mustangs flew their first daylight raids over Berlin, Hitchcock had already seen enough to know his advocacy had been justified. The fighter he'd promoted against institutional resistance had proven itself exactly as he'd predicted. The bomber crews knew who saved them. Thousands of men who flew B-17 and B-24s over Germany came home because Mustangs kept Luftwaffe interceptors away from their formations. After the war, bomber veterans sought out Mustang pilots at reunions, bought them drinks, thanked them for their lives. The gratitude was visceral and permanent. Those men understood with absolute clarity that without long-range fighter escort, the strategic bombing campaign would have failed. Without the Merlin Mustang, they would have died over Germany. The aircraft's nickname among those who flew it was simply the Cadillac of the skies. Smooth, powerful, reliable, beautiful. It looked fast, sitting still on the ground. It sounded magnificent, the Merlin's distinctive growl announcing power and menace. And when pushed to its limits by skilled pilots, it performed miracles. A properly flown P-51 could defeat any piston engine fighter Germany or Japan fielded. The combination of speed, range, maneuverability, firepower, and reliability made it the complete package. The story of how one British test pilot's observation transformed an average fighter into a war-winning weapon illustrates warfare's fundamental unpredictability. Nobody planned for Harker to fly that Mustang on April 30th, 1942. He was visiting socially, flew the aircraft almost as an afterthought, and wrote his memo the next day because he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd experienced. That memo, a few paragraphs of technical assessment, set in motion events that changed the war's outcome. How many bomber crews survived because Harker recognized what a Merlin engine could do for the Mustang? Tens of thousands, certainly. The mathematics of air combat losses before and after P-51 escorts became available tell the story in cold statistics. The human cost, the lives saved, remains incalculable but enormous.